All right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's virtual field trip. If this is your first experience on a Learn Around the World virtual field trip, this is an interactive experience for everyone out there. If you're one of our on-camera guest classrooms, or if you're watching from off of camera today, to send in your live text questions all throughout the show, you can use the Q&A app built right into your Zoom window, or use the hashtag GEOshow if you are a Twitter user. Again, that's the hashtag GEOshow. I do not follow my handle if you know my handle, so don't at me. Just use the hashtag GEOshow if you prefer Twitter. Also, log in and play along with today's show using Kahoot. Today's game pin, if you go to kahoot.it, just enter in 9996691. Pay attention. If you win the quiz at the end of the show, you'll win a postcard from me, GOB, from the Learn Around the World studios. Also, I don't know every single thing there is to know about the Maya. If you stump me on any questions, I'll make sure I post the answers over to flipgrid.com/GeoShow. We want to make sure we give you accurate information. Also, feel free to use this space to share all of your fantastic research about the Maya if you've been talking about them in class this week as well. All right, it's that time of the day, explorers. So are you guys ready? Yeah. GeoShow's now live. Let's do it. All right. You're now watching the GeoShow, and the title of today's program is Los Maya, brought to you by Learn Around the World. We're kicking off today's show with a survey question, so go ahead and grab your devices if you're playing along on Kahoot. Here's how we use Kahoot on the GeoShow. You only get 10 seconds to answer, so not a lot of time, so be quick with your answers. The first couple questions are not worth points, so we're going to use those as practice. Also, if you've never used Kahoot before, don't look directly down at your device. You must look up at the screen where you see me right now to see the questions and the answers. And if you're quiet in class, which I know is difficult sometimes, you can actually hear me read the questions to you as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, the first one is not worth points. So if you're not logged in yet, don't worry. You'll have an opportunity to do so. So just go to kahoot.it. All right, so that first survey question is, we are talking about the Maya today, but where are the ancient Maya cities located? Where are the ancient Maya cities located? Are they in Asia, Europe, South America, or Central America? All right, so for those of you that said green, Central America, you are correct. All right, so we're going to go ahead and find out. If you don't know exactly where Central America is, let's go ahead and refer to our map. You are watching the GeoShow. We're a geography-based program. That means location matters. Let's go ahead and spin our big blue ball around that we're all living on, and we're going to zoom into Central America. Now, just in case some of you, sometimes it gets a little confusing, but basically everything north of Panama technically is North America, and south from Colombia down is South America. So even though when we talk about countries like Mexico and Guatemala today, they are not located in South America. So for those of you that were a little confused by that, as we zoom in, we're going to two sites today. We're going to the site of Palenque, which is located in current day Mexico, and Tikal, which is in current day Guatemala. If you have time to stick around in our bonus extended time after the program, the main part of our program, I'll show you an example of a later Maya city called Tulum. Tulum is located right on the coast of the Caribbean Sea on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, and they still had people living in Tulum when the Spanish arrived. But we're going to focus on the other two cities today, Palenque and Tikal. These were cities during what we call the Classic period. So I'll come back to the Classic period in a second. Basically, it means that this was the height of their civilization. They had the biggest cities during this time. They were creating the many different types of artwork, writing, and just powerful cities that traded with one another. This is the site of Palenque that we're going to visit. We'll visit, here's the Temple of the Inscriptions, one of the most famous temples, and we'll see the palace, and we'll walk up and get a high view of the entire city. And Palenque is really famous for its artwork and the amount of intact writing, which we're going to learn about, that was discovered there. And we're also going to visit Tikal in current day Guatemala. Now, keep in mind, when the Maya, during the Classic period, there was no such thing as Mexico and Guatemala, the countries that we have today. This was just the space where Maya lived. And so Tikal, you can kind of think of it as like the New York City of the ancient Maya world. This is where one of their most powerful cities, one of the most populated cities, and as we're going to see, very, very tall pyramids and temples that we're going to see here at Tikal. So those are our locations that we're talking about and visiting on our virtual field trip today. Okay, we're going to start off today with learning a vocabulary word, and that's going to be Mesoamerica. Can you guys say Mesoamerica? Mesoamerica. Awesome. So Mesoamerica is a term that we use for Central America, roughly about central Mexico down through Nicaragua. And this is what we call this area before the Spanish arrived. So before 1521, we refer to it as Mesoamerica, and the cultures that lived there as Mesoamerican cultures. So this is that area that we're talking about today, Mesoamerica, before the Spanish came. And some examples of cultures that lived here. You may have heard of the Aztec in central Mexico before, or the Zapotec, a little bit lesser known, and the Maya, which we are going to focus on today, which we're living in what's currently El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. All right, so where did the Maya come from, or how did they get to this area? They migrated from central Mexico about 12,000 years ago. They were hunters and gatherers at this time, as all of humans were around the world over 10,000 years ago. But when they started making their civilizations in around Guatemala and Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, and they reached the height of their civilizations. We call this the Classic period. So from 250 AD to 900 AD roughly is what we call the Classic Maya period. This is where their cities were at the most powerful, and they were producing much of their big buildings, pyramids, artwork. This time after, we call the post-Classic period. This is when they abandoned their cities and moved mostly into mountain rural communities. All right, so before we look at two examples of these cities, just to keep in mind, I want to go ahead and touch on this before we get started and seeing some of these places, is each one of these places, the Maya, during the Classic period, there were roughly around 40 city-states. Okay, can you guys say city-states? Okay, so a city-state is kind of like ancient Greece, if you guys have ever heard of Greece before, like Sparta and Athens, for example. So the Maya lived in a very similar structure where all the Maya had similar languages, similar customs, similar beliefs, similar gods, lots of things they shared. However, each one of these cities acted as their own little mini country. They all had their own rulers. Some of these cities were friends and helped each other and traded with one another. And some of these cities were enemies and they had war with one another. kind of think of it like today. If Atlanta, New York City, Boston, Chicago, LA, Portland, if all these places were their own, they had their own rulers, their own presidents, and some of these cities were fighting, some of them were allies, meaning friends. That was what life was like for the Maya in the ancient Maya world. And let me go ahead and stress as well that the Maya are still around. There's not as many of them left, and we'll talk about that as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll go ahead and give a couple of shout outs. Let's give our first shout out to Prairie Branch Elementary over in Missouri. Shout out to all of you watching over in Prairie Branch. And let's give one more to Freeman Public School in Nebraska. Big shout out to you as well. We'll introduce our own camera guests in just a few minutes. But first, we're going to go ahead and get started and visit one of these city-states. And we're going to, I don't know, where do you guys want to go to? So go ahead and grab your Kahoot devices if you're playing along today, and you guys are going to choose your first adventure. All right, so go ahead and grab your devices and let me know, do you guys want to visit to Palenque in Mexico or Tikal in Guatemala? Looks like we're starting off in Palenque today. Excellent, excellent choice. I love Palenque. Palenque is famous for its artwork, its architecture that we're going to learn about. And let's go ahead and head over to Palenque. So Palenque is located in the Chiapas region of Mexico, and it's in a jungle. Sorry. And abracadabra, we're now at Palenque. This is the area that you first walk up to. Palenque is built on top of a very large hill. And as we'll see, but when you look at the front of these pyramids here, you see that the forest is really growing from behind onto like towards the front of the pyramid. It takes a lot of work to keep these cleared off. I found out that part of the maintenance, every now and then, they take power washers and actually power wash the front of these pyramids to keep them clear. About 90% or so of Palenque is under jungle. It's still covered up. And that's because it's not an active city. So when it was an active city and thousands of people were living here, that was, it's like if you live at home and you take care, if you have a yard and you have to do yard work, the city had maintenance and people were living there. When it's a park like it is today, it takes a lot of time and effort to keep it clear. So they only keep the most famous parts clear today. So here we are inside one of the pyramids, and it used to be believed, that the Maya did not use their pyramids to bury people like the Egyptians did. Well, today we know that is actually not true, because they did use it for burial just like the Egyptians did, or a little bit differently. This is one of those tombs. Inside the tomb, you can actually see this red color. I'm going to talk about this red color as we go along. As well. But basically, that red color, when we go back outside and we look at all the pyramids today, I want everyone to keep in mind that, you see dark rock colors, the grays, the blacks, the color of rock and stone. Well, when the Maya lived here, it was all of their pyramids would have been painted red, and in Palenque, they use blues as well. So if we look at the front of this pyramid, it would not look like old stone. It would actually be brightly painted. And this is one of the most famous here at Palenque. This is called the Temple of Inscriptions. It's called the Temple of Inscriptions because right up here in this room, there were about 640 glyphs that were discovered inside of the temple, and that's where it gets its name, the Temple of Inscriptions. This is not what the Maya called it. They would not have called it the Temple of Inscriptions. But inside here, remember we're talking about tombs? This is where the actual first tomb was discovered by archaeologists. An archaeologist is a historian or someone who studies history. They go out and they dig up old ruined sites, and they study ancient civilizations and peoples and so forth. And so inside of this pyramid was Tikal the Great. That's where he was buried, and he was one of the last rulers here before the fall of the city or the abandonment of the city. The last date recorded here at Palenque was 799 AD. Well, briefly look, this is the palace. We'll come back to the palace. But Palenque is famous also because all of the water that runs through the city. There's 4 rivers that run through here. Inside their palace, they actually had running water, so they were able to control water and have it diverted indoors. So indoor water or running water is something that not a lot of cultures around the world had at this time. And we're going to walk to the top of the city, one of the top hills. This is called the Cross Group. Pikal the Great Son built these pyramids. And we'll climb on top of the tallest one of the Cross Group and get a look down over the entire city. And as we pan across, we're going to walk back down here to this is the palace in the Temple of Inscriptions. The one that we were just looking at and talking about Pikal the Great, where he's buried, is right behind this tree line there. And when we look out over the distance, you really have to use your imaginations here, guys, because it looks very different here today than it would have when the Maya were here. When the Maya were here, this would have been an active city. All of the trees that you see would have been cleared out. This would have been many structures. Remember, much of the city is below, it's covered up. It's been swallowed up by the jungle. And but when the Maya were living here, it would have been cleared out and would have other structures as well, not only these stone pyramids, but wooden dwellings as well for people's homes. So these big pyramids that we see here, these are for religious ceremonies and rituals and burial in some cases, like we learned from the first ones. But this is not where people lived. People would have lived in wooden homes that are long gone today. This is something called a corbel arch. We'll come back to it, but this is a common technique that the Mayans use. You may have noticed when I was walking in that pyramid, in that little narrow hallway, that was a corbel arch. I'll point out a few of these as we go through the cities today, because the Maya, this is one of the techniques they used in their buildings. So this is the palace, the royal palace, and we'll go and check out the royal palace a little bit. We weren't the only ones checking out the royal palace today. We have a little bird in here taking a break. It is hot here, so it's hot at Palenque as well as Tikal. And when we look here, this is something called stucco. Can you guys say stucco? Stucco. So stucco was a limestone that the Maya would crush up. So limestone is a rock, it's a soft rock, and they would, hammer it down and crush it up, and then they would boil it, and they would boil it until it boiled down into this thick kind of plaster, and we call this stucco. And stucco is what they would spread on top of all of the buildings. So now we can see it's peeling off, it's breaking off parts of the palace. So the Maya put this here, but you have to, as I said, use your imagination. So all the buildings that we see today would have been covered with this stucco. So it would have had the stucco that would have been spread on the outside of all of these rocks. So it would have had that bright white color, and then there would have been blues and reds painted on top of that white color. In some areas, the stucco was used for artwork as well. And here is one example inside the palace. This is one of the open areas. You can see it's covered up here today to kind of protect that stucco, that artwork that's over across the courtyard from us. Much of the artwork, so Palenque, one of the reasons Palenque is so famous is because of the artwork that was discovered here and the writing called glyphs that was discovered here. Much of that is in a museum that's really close by to the actual site right here. And I'll show you some pictures from inside the museum here in a second. Now, this is a tower. So, and throughout all the Maya world, this is the only tower. So this is the only city that this type of structure was built. And this is another example about how, the Maya they all operated as their own individual cities. And this is just a building style or technique that only occurred at this city, and it did not occur in any of the other locations, even though pyramids did. Pyramids were common throughout all of their cities. And if we see here, this is on top of many of the pyramids is typically a room, as I was talking about in the Temple of Inscriptions. And in some of those here today, you can see some of that artwork, and We can see some of the glyphs to the left. We're going to get a better look at these in just a few minutes. On the left side as well. And these are in those rooms at the top of the pyramids, and lots of water running through here. So again, this is a temple of inscriptions. It's about 85 feet tall, this pyramid. As we're going to see, comparatively to Tikal, this is quite a small pyramid. And when we look inside that temple of inscriptions, this is where the very first tomb was discovered by modern day archaeologists inside here, and that's where Pikal the Great was buried. A little nifty thing that was here was they had a speaking tube in here. And a speaking tube, I guarantee you, most of you have used these before. If you've ever been to a playground before, you know how you go to a playground sometimes and there's this little tube that you can talk to your best friend on the other side of the playground because the tube goes through like the jungle gym and it carries your voice a really far distance. That's what this speaking tube was. And it went all the way down to the tomb of Pikal the Great, because the Maya believed that their rulers, their kings, were godlike, and when they died, then you could still converse and speak with them. And here they had a speaking tube to do that. And here's an example of one of those tombs. At the top of many of the temples, they keep you out of there. They want to protect the artwork that's left, that they left on site and did not take to a museum. And that's what we see here. And again, that tower that we see here in Palenque, again, is famous today because of their such great examples of their artwork and writing that is left in and around the city. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open up for our first round of questions. Make sure you get those sent in. We have Mrs. Sandor's classroom wants to know, why did the Maya leave in around 900 AD? So yeah, so those of you paying attention, I said the classic period ended. It ended differently for different cities. So for example, the two cities that we're going to see today, the last recorded date in Palenque was 799 AD. The last recorded date in Tikal was 879. Now, why during this time, it's within 100 years or so, why were these cities abandoned? And most scholars today, the leading theories are because through much of the Maya world, through the lowlands of Guatemala, which is where Tikal was, and even where Palenque is in southern Mexico, is that the Maya would slash and burn. So what I mean by that, so this is naturally a jungle here. So if we have lots of trees, they would slash the trees, so knock down all the trees, and then they would burn them, which creates ash, and that creates a very fertile soil. So it's great for growing corn. It's great for growing other crops that the Maya grew. However, you do this over hundreds of years and you cut down many of those trees, and there's not very many trees left. It changed the environment, the local weather. So there was extreme drought. So scientists have looked back during this time period and they discovered that it was extreme drought during this time. And so what happens when a group of people are starving? And first thing you do is you turn and you point your fingers to your politicians, your rulers. So the belief today is that people were starving and they abandoned their rulers. Political unrest is what we call it. They abandoned their cities and they went out to live more of a rural lifestyle. And many of them went up into the Yucatan as well, where there were some large cities in the post-classic period, but not comparatively, not the same as the classic period. Okay, Mrs. Oliver's classroom wants to know, why was red such a significant color for them if they used so much of it? In Tikal, they used more red. In Palenque, they used other colors as well. Much of it is because that's one of the natural colors that they had available to them. So they get the red color in this part of the world from a parasite that grows on a cacti, and you crush that parasite up. When it dries out, it makes a red powder, and you mix it with water, and it makes this deep red paint. I don't know if there's any like major significance behind red versus other colors. It's just that it was popular. How many tombs are on site? I do not know as much as far as like how many tombs. Only the rulers would have been buried in those tombs that we see within the pyramids. And at Tikal, I only know of one in particular, which we're going to see Jaguar Temple when we head over to Tikal. Let's go over and introduce. We don't have them. I don't have their camera. I'm asking them to start their camera and see if they can get that working. But we have with us on camera today, or at least on microphone with us today, we have Mrs. Hood's third graders from Bethlehem, Connecticut. Welcome to the show, guys. Hi. All right. Do you guys have any fun facts that you would like to share about the Maya today?
No.
No? Okay. Do you have any questions so far?
You would have a question?
No.
No? Okay. Well, we're going to continue on then. Keep those questions sent in from everyone on the outside. We're going to shift gears a little bit here, and let's see. We're going to look over. Don't have any questions over on Twitter yet. So we're going to learn a couple more vocabulary words before we head over to Tikal, and a little bit about Maya writing, because Maya writing is very unique, and when we compare it to writing today. And first of all, we've used this word a lot so far, Maya, okay? And so we're going to talk the difference between Maya and Mayan. These are commonly misused words. I misuse these all the time because you'll see this a lot. You'll see people talk about and use Mayan as an adjective. So for example, Mayan pyramids, Mayan clothes, Mayan food. This sounds correct to us in English, right? If you think about American music, American movies, Mayan, right? So that sounds like it should be correct, but it's not. So Mayan refers to the family of languages that they spoke, and Maya is both a noun and an adjective. So when we talk about the 29 to 32 different languages within the Mayan family of languages, that's when we use the term Mayan, and Maya should be used for everything else. So when we talk about the people, places, and things, it's the Maya people, Maya clothes, Maya food, Maya pyramids. All right. And our next one is Corbel arch. I showed that one to you earlier. So a Corbel arch is when you take blocks and you put them on top of one another, and very little by little you come closer and closer and closer to the middle, and then you put one on the top, right? And so if you ever made an arch, if we have any fans of Legos here, this is the type of arch you would make. You would make a Corbel arch. So the Maya used this all across the Maya world to make their inside areas. As we see down on the left, we see a hallway. This is in Palenque where they controlled water. This is not a true arch. A true arch has more of a curved, kind of a semi-circle shape to it that the Maya did not use. The advantages of a Corbel arch is it can support a lot of weight. The disadvantages is you can only build narrow passageways. It's hard to make a really big inside area because you can only build so wide and still have it strong. So these are called stelas and altars. Again, stelas and altars. Can you guys say stelas?
Stelas.
And altar.
Altar.
Okay, so the stelas and altars are typically found together. So the stela is the one that is standing straight up, kind of like a tombstone, and the altar is the one that is laying flat, horizontally. And these were used during times of religious ceremony and ritual, and in particular on the altars, the many Mesoamerican cultures participated in sacrifices, both animal and humans, and the Maya would do and perform those on the altars. They also practice bloodletting. So that's if you were like to poke or prick your finger and drip blood as you pray. It's called bloodletting. Many people are also curious. We need to keep in mind that this is a very long time ago before we have all the knowledge that we have today. And so to the Maya, offering blood was the most valuable thing that you could offer to your gods. So, what do gods need? Need tangible they don't need items, right? So they were offering the most valuable thing to them, which was blood. And so when we go around, you won't see them all in great condition, some of them in the jungle. So remember stucco that we were learning about. So the Maya would crush it up and boil it down, and then you would get this thick plaster substance, and you would spread that over all the buildings. You could also create statues and artwork out of it, as you see to the left. This is an example found in Palenque, in that museum. In Palenque, they would use jade. Jade was a precious stone for them in their jewelry making. And they wrote using glyphs. Again, using glyphs. Can you guys say glyphs?
Glyphs.
So glyphs is the process of writing with pictures. Writing with pictures. You may have heard of hieroglyphs before. The Egyptians wrote with pictures, and the Maya wrote with pictures as well. The Maya had the most sophisticated writing system out of all Mesoamerican cultures, and I would say probably more than or all of the indigenous cultures throughout the Americas. So unfortunately, when the Spanish arrived and came, the Catholic Church tried to wipe out the religion of the Maya, so they burned all their books. So much of the information that was written down was all burned and lost forever, all but four. There's 4 books that survive today. We call those the codices. And the other example of writing, as we see here, the writing that was written in stucco or carved in stone, we still have that survived today as well. So when you look at it closely, you would write with glyphs, you would use different pictures, and you would write in a square format. So depending on where that picture was located within that square and what the picture was of, would dictate or determine what that word was. And here's an example of carving into their writing into stucco. And again, they could write on paper. They didn't have to carve into stucco, but most of that was burned. Which brings us to our next survey question. If you're playing along with Kahoot today, I want to know from all of you out there. Don't forget to get logged in with our game pin today, which is 999-6691. Next survey question. Have you ever used glyphs to write with or something similar? Yes, no, or maybe so. What do you guys think? All right, so most of you are saying no. But riddle me this, Batman. Have any of you ever written text messages before? Have any of you ever used emojis? If you used emojis, you've used a glyph-like form of writing. So this is really interesting when we talk about things that go in cycles throughout the years. And civilization today, we use letters to write in the English language, but we're very slowly going back to writing with glyphs when we talk about writing with emojis. And I wrote you a message. I love GeoShow. All right, so really quickly, I cannot read Mayan writing. However, I can tell you and show you how to write with Mayan numbers, at least smaller amount of numbers. And so they use the dots to represent the number 1. They use the bar to represent the number 5. And they use a seashell to represent the number 0. And here's something interesting to think about. The Maya were really great at math. I mean, really, really great at math. They were excellent mathematicians, and they were excellent astronomers. So they were able to map out and track the orbits of the planets and cycles. And so they had solar eclipses. They had planet alignment mapped out thousands of years in advance. That's how good at math they were. A lot had to do with it because they came up with the concept of 0. So if some of our younger classrooms, the older you get, the more advanced math you learn, you're going to learn how important that number 0 is in math. And 0 is very important. And the 0 was written by a seashell. So the seashell is how the 0 is written. So if we look at numbers, here's how they work together. So if we look at the number 1 is 1 dot, 2 is 2, 3 dots is 3, 4 dots is 4, and a bar is 5. Okay, let's start putting some of those together. What do you guys think in Mrs. Hood's class? What is a bar plus 3 dots? 8. Awesome. What do you guys think? 2 bars and 4 dots. What do you think that is?
14.
14, okay. And what do you guys think? Here, let's see if we can trick you. What do you think a seashell with a dot on top of it is? All right. So, so it's a trick question, and that's because we have to shift it a little bit. So if we look down here, we have 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So once they put a dot on top of a seashell, so they hover the dot over a seashell, now that would be 20. So 2 dots over it would be 30, 40, and so on. And then when they get into larger numbers, they would combine them a little bit differently as well. But basically, that's how you can count and write smaller numbers. All right, so we're going to head over and visit Tikal. So again, keep sending in those questions. We'll open up the floor for questions again in just 1 minute. But first, we're going to learn about Tikal. So abracadabra, we're now in another country. How cool is that? Yay, virtual field trips. So we are now in Guatemala, current day Guatemala, and we're going to look at Tikal. Now, Tikal was one of the most powerful classic cities. This one was abandoned, just like Palenque, in the 800s, and it was massive. This was very, very big. Just like Palenque, about 90% of it today is under jungle, so not a lot of it is kept clear, only the most famous parts, and we're going to see those today. So we're going to see Temple 1 called Jaguar Temple. This is Temple 2, Temple 3, and Temple 4. So we're going to come back to those temples many times. Temple 4 is the tallest one in the background here. That's where we'll finish our virtual tour. It's 210 feet tall. And if you remember, the Temple of Inscriptions was only 85 feet tall at Palenque. So they're going to be a lot taller, a lot more massive here at Tikal as we walk through. Tikal had, when we look across the city, we need to keep in mind there are 3,000 or so structures throughout the ruined site. Most of that, again, is under jungle, but it would have been even larger than that because all the buildings and the pyramids, these were used for ritual. These were like city buildings. You can think of like your town hall or your police station back home. Well, people's homes were built out of wood, and so those are long gone. So this is a sayabir tree. This connects, the Maya believed in this parts of the world, they believed it connected all the after world and the living world. And when we're talking about trees and we look around, again, all these trees on each side, none of this forest would have been here. Around the best guesses or estimates today are somewhere around 30 to 60,000 people lived in Tikal. Some people have guessed all the way up to 200,000, but most reliable scholars today believe that there just wouldn't have been enough food to support that many people. But if you've never been to a jungle before, I'm going to turn up the volume here. And often on the GEOshow, we use something called deer ears. So if you cup your hands like you're going to hold some water in your hands, now put those cups behind your ears. And now, abracadabra, you have deer ears. You should be able to hear me better if you point your deer ears towards the speakers. And let's go ahead and listen to what it sounds like in the jungle. It's very loud. All right, so as we come out of the forest here, we see a very large hill. Well, it's not really a hill. It's actually a pyramid. So that's just the back of the pyramid that's not kept clear off. When we look at the front of the pyramid, this is a good time because this is a great one that's flat on the top, is to talk about, the differences. Usually when we think about pyramids, we think about the Egyptians, right? And we think about a pyramid with an apex on the top, a pointed top. Well, the Maya did not build their pyramids that way. They built them with a flat top on them. In this case, because this one was used for rituals and it was used in ceremonies, whereas, or to come up and observe the sky, the night sky. And this is in contrast to the Egyptian pyramids. But then sometimes there would be a room on top of it, like some of the pyramids that we've already seen in Palenque and that we're going to see next as well. So be careful. We're going to walk up these steps. Look how steep they are. Notice there's no hand railings. So if you fall right here, it's not going to feel good. All right, so as we look over the edge and across the top of the tree canopy, so a tree canopy, if you don't know what that word is, so the canopy is like the roof of the forest, or the top part of an umbrella, if you will. So that's where the tops of the trees, we call that the canopy of the forest. So you can see Temple 1 or Jaguar Temple sticking its head out of the tree canopy. Jaguar Temple is 150 feet tall, so much taller than the 85-foot Temple of Inscriptions that we saw at Palenque. As we go back down, remember we just learned what these stone items were that are laid out in front of this pyramid. So these are the stelas and altars. You can see there are lots of them. So these are where those religious ceremonies would take place. What do you guys think is under all of these big mounds? Yeah, pyramids and buildings. Remember, there were about 3,000 buildings and structures here at this site. Most of them are under the jungle. These are old stelas and altars as well. There's some are broken and just kept on the ground. And so it would just be too much work to keep the entire city nice and clear, like the first pyramid that we just saw, and the Grand Plaza that we're walking up to now. All right, so we're going to walk around. That was the back of Jaguar Temple. We're walking around. I like to show this because much of the walkway, it's not paved walkways around here. It's just jungle footpaths that we're walking around. Even in the cleared out areas, it's just footpaths. And this is the Grand Plaza. So the Grand Plaza, and often I get asked, why did the Maya call it the Grand Plaza? The Maya did not call this the Grand Plaza. This is Temple 1. This is Temple 2. This is like the religious center of Tikal. This is called the Grand Plaza by people that study Tikal today, primarily people English speakers that come here to study it have called it the Grand Plaza, but the Maya would not have called it that. And that just helps us to give names to it so we can refer to it. When we pan across the Grand Plaza, again, we see Jaguar Temple, 150 feet tall, over to Temple 2. Now, Jaguar Temple is called Jaguar Temple because inside is a tomb, and inside that tomb, the depictions, the pictures on the wall had a throne with a jaguar over top of it, and that's where it gets the name Jaguar Temple. And many of the kings would associate themselves with animals during the day or during this time, and that was in some cases like a jaguar or an eagle, for example. And when we look here right beside Jaguar Temple, this is something called the ball court. So the Maya, like many other Mesoamerican cultures, so not just the Maya, but other cultures such as the Aztec as well, played something called the ball game. Now, the ball game is just like it sounds. It's a game with a ball, and the object is to hit the ball back and forth. There were ways to score, but the main objective is to knock the ball through this hoop. There's a hoop that would be vertical on one of the walls, one of the side walls. Now, there's no hoop left here today, most likely because it was made of wood, but some other cities around the Maya world had hoops made of stone, and because of that, those hoops are still there. So that's why we know about those hoops today. So it was you were not allowed to use your feet or your hands. You had to like side swipe it. You kind of like had to tail whip the ball with the side of your hips. When we go out into the Grand Plaza right in front and look at the Jaguar Temple, you can see how steep the steps are. Very steep here. In fact, you cannot climb to the top of Temple 1 today, the Jaguar Temple, because someone fell off and got really, really hurt there. But we can go on top of Temple 2, and we are in just 1 minute. We're going to go around and check out some of the edges of some of these temples, the sides of some of these temples around the Grand Plaza. We see some tiki huts over some of the sides, and that's because they're protecting some of the artwork that was chiseled into the side of the temples, like that 7-foot-tall face. But keep in mind, I mentioned earlier how hot it is here. You need to keep in mind when we explore different parts of the world, especially when we come into places that are really tropical, you need to drink plenty of water, guys. You need to be drinking plenty of water even back home today. All of you, go drink some water at lunchtime. And so you need to stay hydrated all the time, but especially when you are in this part of the world. I met a girl that had to go to the hospital after hiking up and down all of these pyramids in the hot sun in Tikal. So we can go on the top of Temple 2 because of this nice safe staircase on the back of Temple 2 today. So that's really nice for us because we can come out here and see what it looks like from above. And as we walk to the front of Temple 2, we'll turn around and take a look at the top of the temple. Again, we can see some carvings in the top there and some of that white stucco that's remaining on here. And again, these tops would have most likely been red when we look out over the Grand Plaza. You know, all of these buildings would have been painted on top of that stucco or had that white color as we look at the Grand Plaza. Now we're going to skip ahead, and some people often ask me, this is the oldest or one of the oldest pyramids here. So this city itself dates back to 300 BC. And so their structures began around that time. But the Temple 1 wasn't completed until 727. So right before about a little over 100 years before they abandoned the city. Now, when we look out, we're on top of Temple 4 right now. Sometimes I call it the Star Wars Temple. Do we have any fans of Star Wars here today? Oh, our class had to head out. So if anyone is a fan of Star Wars here today, so this is a famous scene that George Lucas came down here and shot. And during the first Star Wars, and I say first, I guess it would be episode 4 today, there's a scene where the Millennium Falcon flies into the Rebel base. It flies across this sky that we're looking at right here. And this is Temple 1, Jaguar Temple, Temple 2, and Temple 3. And so you can go back and watch Star Wars with your moms and dads, and you can tell that fun fact to them when you see the Millennium Falcon fly over the Rebel base. And we'll go to the back of Temple 4 really quickly and watch the sun go down as a sunset because, one, the sunset is cool all over the world. And two, is just to talk about this forest really quickly is, again, much of this forest would not be here if we were here in the 700s. You would see all agricultural fields out in the distance. And many times people ask me about the animals in this part of the world in the jungle. Well, most of the animals, about 2/3 of the animals here are nocturnal, meaning they come out at nighttime, and about 200 species of bats live in this jungle. All right, so much of everything is still covered up today, as we can see here. Inside, when you explore it, remember that Corbel arch we were talking about? But here's something to keep in mind. These wooden beams were placed here by the Maya. They're still around because they're inside. They were protected. The ones outside have long been rotted away. And this picture is those exact beams from the late 1800s when the site was discovered. If you look here, if you notice, if we have any guesses in our classrooms, the left side of Jaguar Temple has really straight edges. It looks like new construction, where the right side is really rounded. Do we have any guesses of why that is? Well, I'll give you a hint. They were both once rounded. So it was rounded on the left and the right. And it was rounded on the left and the right because as we look, this is what it looks like when it was uncovered in the late 1880s or early 1880s, I should say, when they chopped down all the trees, all the forest that was growing on top of here. Those rocks got really rounded, and we call it weathered from the wind and the rain and the trees that were just chipping away at those rocks. But that left side was reconstructed. So often, people ask, how do we know so much about the Maya when many of their books and things were burned and so forth? Well, much of it is like being a detective, and much of it is trying to recreate the process of building like the Maya would have used. And so part of that was reconstructed in efforts to try to learn more about the Maya. So as we can see here, there we go. And that's why it looks so different. So this picture was taken in 1882 on top of Jaguar Temple, looking back towards Temple 4, that Star Wars temple. And that gives you a good idea of, 100% of the city was covered by jungle. But today it takes a lot of work just to keep that 10% uncovered. All right, so we're going to jump right into. I got a lot of questions coming in, and we're going to get right back to them in the lightning round. But I want to go ahead and launch our Geo quiz for our classrooms that need to run because we're a little bit over 45 minutes here, and we're going to go ahead and launch it. So go ahead and make sure you're logged in today at Kahoot.it. Game pin 999-6691. Good luck, explorers. All right, are the Maya still around today? Yes or no? All right, yes, Maya are still around. They live in more rural communities in the mountains of Guatemala, for example, or the Yucatan Peninsula. Charming Dog takes the lead. Next question. In Maya writing, what number does the seashell represent? All right, so 0. Great job. Bold unicorn. Where did the Maya come from? Did they come from Europe, Africa, Central Mexico, or South America? Where did they come from 12,000 years ago? All right, Central Mexico. Joyful eagle. Great job. The Maya used to write with. They used glyphs, lines, letters, or emojis. All right, glyphs. Great job, explorers. Joyful eagle still in the lead. Last question. Which city was most like modern-day New York City? Meaning it had one of the biggest populations. Many of the buildings were very, very tall. All right, it was Tikal. Great job. And today's winner is dun, 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 Joyful Eagle. So if you are a Joyful Eagles teacher, please make sure you send me your school address so I can get that snail mail sent out. And you can do that over at learnaroundtheworld.com/prize. Again, learnaroundtheworld.com/prize. The URL at the bottom of your screen. All right, for everyone else out there, if you have to head out, have a fantastic day, fantastic weekend. I encourage you all to go out there and learn more about the Maya, learn more about Mesoamerica, these cultures that much of the food that we have today, domesticated food like corn, chocolate. Any chocolate fans? I thought so. It's gourds, pumpkins, squashes, beans, all kinds of delicious foods we still rely on today was first domesticated by Mesoamerican cultures. Which one of those is the Maya? In fact, Maya believed they were children of the corn, and they even had a corn god. They had about 165 gods, by the way. All right, so we're going to get to open up for questions. Let's see. How did kids get their education? I know that the royal families would have had more education opportunities. As far as like most commoners, it's my understanding you would have fulfilled a similar role as your parents did. So your education would be helping out your parents and learning how to be a farmer, be a soldier, or whatever you were, whatever your place was in society. Mrs. Oliver wants to know, can you book events like weddings and types of things at Maya sites? I don't know. I noticed that Maya people, I forgot to point it out because of time. When we were there at the Grand Plaza, there was a group of Maya that were coming to pray. They were coming to, the people still use these sites from time to time, but I did not notice anyone there getting married. I imagine you probably can. So maybe Maya do that live in the area? I don't know. That's a great question and something great to research more into. Let's see. What have they found in the temples, like bodies? Yeah, in the cases of tombs, there have been bodies, and then sometimes there is nothing inside the pyramid. So for example, that very first pyramid I showed you at Tikal, everything's on the outside of that. So that pyramid was solely used for going up. There were, depending on where you were located in the Maya world, if you were more into astronomy or just your religious ceremonies and rituals that you would go on top of. And then also in their writing. So I can tell you in the rooms at the top, so many of the glyphs that we have, say in the Temple of Inscriptions, for example, the most famous and well documented was just in accounts of Pikal the Great and Palenque and some of the wars and so forth. So that's what a lot of what they would write about. Were there any natural disasters that were happening? So yes, mostly in this part of the world, you have hurricanes that come. So that would be a natural disaster. For the Maya that lived in the western parts and southern parts of Guatemala, Mexico, for example, or El Salvador, then earthquakes and volcanoes. But most of them in their classic period, they were down in the lowlands. So you're not having any volcanoes down in the lowlands. And then they had extreme drought, and that was primarily caused by themselves. So, we can learn a lot from the Maya as far as like destroying our local environments, how that may affect us in a negative way going forward. What did they eat besides chocolate and corn? So they ate other foods that came from this part of the world, things like pumpkins, things like let's say beans, the black bean. So beans were really important because when you have part of the reasons these civilizations in Mesoamerica were able to get so massive, so large compared to other areas around the Americas, and even the world, is because of the bean. No longer are you relied so much about going and finding meat when you can have protein from a plant. So the bean was huge. Avocados, peppers come from this, were first domesticated in this part of the world. So anyone like spicy food? Awesome. Let's see. Let me check just really quickly over on Twitter again, see if we have any. So Mrs. Smith's classroom wants to know, what did the Maya eat and where? And did they have any schools? So some of the same questions. Let's see. As far as wearing, I know more about the rulers and kings, and some of what the rulers would wear at times were feathers from tropical birds, or they would also wear, say in the jaguar temple, for example, a ruler associating themselves with a king, so would wear like a jaguar pelt. A jaguar is the apex predator of this area of the world. That means they're the top predator, and so it was an animal that was well revered. It's held in high honor by the Maya, and especially by the ruling class and their kings. Great questions there. For all our classrooms that are just sticking it out with this, we'll give you a little bonus here. And I do want to, we'll show you a little bit here really quickly, Tulum. So Tulum is an example. Remember, most of these big, massive cities, the really big cities like Tikal and Palenque, these were abandoned in the 8th and 9th centuries. And most of the people either went to the mountains to live in small rural communities, or there were other large towns and cities that happened in northern Yucatan Peninsula, things like Chichen Itza, for example. But there's another city, many of them in the Yucatan, and one of those was called Tulum, was the name today. The Maya did not call it Tulum. And we look at Tulum. Tulum is an example of a smaller Maya city. Only about 1,000 to 1,600 people lived there. It was still active when the Spanish arrived in the 1500s. Tulum is a really neat one to visit, especially if you don't have the time, or maybe you have family members with a physical disability. Maybe it's just really difficult to get to the jungles of say Guatemala or other parts of Mexico. So Tulum is a really easy access place to get because it's right off the highway. It's just south of a place called Cancun, about an hour and a half, I believe, from Cancun. So many of you may have heard of that before. It's a small city. It's surrounded on 3 sides with a wall, and only the reason it's surrounded on 3 sides and not 4 is because it's located right on the water. So we see the Caribbean Sea here as we walk out and take a look out at that beautiful water. And so we're going to walk into the city here. And first thing you're going to notice is all of the buildings and structures here are very small compared to the other cities. And Many of them are just one story. You don't see any over one story very much. There would have been wooden structures here, just like at the other cities that are long gone. And what's interesting to think about as well is that in the Yucatan, for especially if we have any returners here on the Geo Show, if anyone participated in our Natural Wonders show, you may remember cenotes. This is a cenote located inside of the city, a semi-closed cenote. And so cenotes are an access point to fresh water. There are no rivers in the Yucatan Peninsula. So all the water that you get is you need access to groundwater, which typically comes from a cenote. There's 2 beaches located within the city walls. One of them you can't go on today. They set that aside for sea turtles that lay their eggs. And when you look at the buildings, remember I said there were no tall structures. This is the tallest one at Tulum. So you can see not nearly what we have over 210 feet in Temple 4 in Tikal, for example. So another thing you'll notice about a difference here is the number of people. So a lot of people come here, especially come here to the beach. If you look down at the beach there, and that's because of the easy access it is to get here compared to trekking in the jungle to get to some of these places. And so you can imagine Tulum was a popular city for trade. So when we look out over the water, you can have to use your imagination that many boats would be going up and down the coastline here. Inland cities would bring their goods to Tulum. Tulum was a trading point. It was a stop along the way. And that's how trade happened with the Maya. They would trade over great distances from city to city to city. And so Tulum, again, still had people in it when the Spanish arrived. As you can see, all the people that come to this site as we walk out. You can see those big palm leaves, and we're going to walk under a Corbel Arch again to conclude Tulum. So again, this city had people living in it when the Spanish arrived in the 1500s. And what's interesting to talk about or to think about is within 100 years, so I can't stress this enough, within 100 years, that 90% of all Mesoamericans, 90%. So that's, if you look around your class right now, if there's 20 people, let's say there's 20 people in your class, that's saying within 100 years, if you had 20 people, then only 2 of them are left alive. Okay, so we're talking about, all the Maya people, all the Aztecs, all of them. And why is that? Why did 90% of them die under such a short period of time? That's because of European diseases. So things like smallpox, the Black Plague, these are diseases that devastated not only Mesoamerica, but indigenous cultures all throughout the Americas because their immune systems did not have any protection against these European diseases that Europeans had been living with for centuries and millennia. And because of that, it really wreaked havoc throughout the Maya world, throughout the Mesoamerican world, and throughout all of it. When you think about, many of you are familiar with, if you're from the US, for example, if you're familiar with the Pilgrims and where the Pilgrims made their homes in Massachusetts at Plymouth, that home would not be available if it wasn't for the Black Plague. The Wampanoag, the people that lived there, had lots of people living there. In just a few short years before the Pilgrims arrived, almost all of them died from the Black Plague. So this happened. We can see this same theme happen all throughout the Americas. So yeah. All right. So I want to say, are there still jaguars in Mexico? Yes, there are still jaguars. Just like other large animals around the world, they're not doing very well, mostly because of loss of habitat. Very large predators need lots of space. They need a lot of land. But yes, there are still jaguars around. All right, we're going to head out, call it a day. And I hope everyone is inspired. Go out there, read more about the Maya, read more about Mesoamerican cultures, and visit Mexico and Guatemala one day. I hope you all get the chance to do so. Until next time, I'm GOB. You've been watching the Geo Show. It's a great big world out there, so keep exploring. Bye, guys. Have a great weekend.